You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
Lots of people had a dud 2020. In fact, most of us had a dud 2020. But for Sharon Johal, who started her career as a lawyer and then went on to be a star on Neighbours, her year was a lot worse than most.
That sort of pain just requires like your family and your best friends to just kind of be sitting with you, being sad together, and we kind of missed out on that.
From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman. If you're a fan of the Aussie TV show Neighbours, then you've definitely seen Sharon Johal on your TV. She played the character Dipi Rebecchi, who I understand is Toadie's sister-in-law. I don't watch Neighbours, but even I know who Toadie is. I don't even know how I know. I just know. And she was on the show from early 2017 to early in 2021. Landing this gig as a series regular was really groundbreaking. Sharon was the first Indian Punjabi woman in a mainstream television role. But her experience on Neighbours was tougher than she could have possibly imagined.
I did my scene, but I went into the room and I just had a full-on panic attack breakdown. And I think there was one scene left to be filmed. And I was just like, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And I just walked out of there hoping that experience would have been good. And I would have walked out going, yep, I survived it, but was just crying on the curbside.
There was COVID. She was stuck in a toxic work environment. And then she fell unexpectedly pregnant. What happened after that in Sharon's personal and professional lives are things that she's still struggling to process. But ultimately, this is a story about grit, determination, and authenticity. You are going to love getting to know Sharon Johal. Here she is. Sharon, I think you've got the best story I've ever heard about how you met your partner.
Thank you.
Can you tell it?
Yes, so it's interesting because we lived in the same township in Adelaide. We lived in Mawson Lakes, and it's a very small little town. And I was going to university at the time, studying law and commerce, and it's just literally the same struggles I had then as I have now in balancing exercise and all that kind of stuff. I was going for a jog, and there was a guy that was kind of in the middle of the street and was lost and had a stick, so I knew he was blind. And I was running, I'm always running late. So I was running late from my lecture and I was like, I've got to ask him and see if he's okay. So I went up to him and I said, are you all right? Do you want help? Do you need to get anywhere? And he told me that he was new to the area, but he needed to go to a specific address. And he said, could you take me there? So obviously I took him there, and he taught me a lot about actually how to best assist people with visual impairment. And he asked me to hold on to his elbow because that's how you do it. And as we were walking, I could hear a little bit of an accent and a little bit of an Indian accent, and I'm of Indian heritage. So I was like, oh, are you Indian? And he said, yes, I am. And I'm like, that's strange because my dad knows everyone in the Indian community. I don't know who you guys are. And we started chatting. And before we knew it, we got to the house, and there was this boy that was on the balcony, and he was very obviously hungover, and he was like, what's going on, Dad? And that was my husband-to-be. And I didn't really notice him at the time. I was doing my own thing and he was doing his own thing, but we became fast family friends. And then 2 years later, my best friend had a birthday, and Adelaide's a very small community, and her sister was friends with him, and we were at the same party. She had a medical emergency, and we ended up being drunk, and we were in the waiting room at the hospital, and it was just me and him, and I was already lit, and I was just giving him heaps of shit, and we just bonded after that, and we've been inseparable since, and that's how we met.
That is such a good story. I love it so much. And when did you get married? How long after that did you get married?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a journey to getting married because my parents we're born in Australia, but they're quite conservative Indian parents, and they wanted us to marry a very specific type of boy. So, same religion, same cultural status, same caste even, same education, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, that is so difficult. Like, we live in a country where there's not many of us and you're expecting us to find the same. Also, there's a very different mindset. And that was never my type anyway. So they fought with me about my choice in partner because we knew we were the ones for each other. We wanted to get married, and my parents were like, no, you can't marry him. And if you do, we're going to disown you. His family was very much pro me. They're lovely people, and they took me in with open arms. So I told my parents, I said, we're going to get married. And my dad's like, if you do, that's it, you're out of the family. And so we took it on the sly, and we were secretly together for a number of years. And then I got busted. My mum, he was sick, and I pretended to chuck a sick and went to his house, who's the only 2 streets away. She saw which way my car went. It wasn't going to the city as I was supposed to go to work, and she kind of followed me. And I've got a very loud, booming voice. She heard my voice inside the house. She called my dad, snitched to my dad. My dad's like a farm guy. We grew up on a rural farm. He came with his Hilux ute, or Toyota Land Cruiser, I think it was the time, literally ran over the front roses of the garden of the house, comes in, and he was so angry because his dad had become my dad's friend. And so he was angry that he had lied basically within the friendship that we were still dating. And we started arguing, and he was like, I have 2 guns at home. And I was like, well, is that a threat? Like, what? He goes, no threat. And I'm like, all right, Dad, you need to calm down. And the grandma that was there, his grandma, she's so cute. Like, we're all rowing, and she's just like, would you guys like a cup of tea? And we just laugh about that to the end of the day, because my dad didn't know what he was doing and what he was saying. And I'm like, why are you yelling at them? It's my fault that we're here. I'm taking responsibility. And then after that, I was like, that's it. It's all over for me. But actually, it worked out okay. His family talked to him. And long story short, many years after, my sister got married in the meantime. She got divorced. She married the right everything, and it didn't work out. And I think that was a big eye-opener for them. And, fast forward a few years later, my brother's marrying a beautiful woman called Katrina Johnson. So we've got a very mixed family now. So I think pushing back and standing up to my parents really helped my siblings as well.
That's so interesting. And then you had the big proper Bollywood 5-day wedding.
Yeah, so that was only a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2018. And ideally, like both of us, we love Italy, and we feel like that's our spirit country. And we just wanted a small little wedding there. And in between all of this time, unfortunately, my husband's father passed away. So it was just his mum, and she had wishes that she wanted. So she's quite a grand lady, and she wanted this big Bollywood affair at the Adelaide Convention Centre, because nowhere else could host 500 people in Adelaide. It was actually a 2-week long ceremony. So it was 5 different events over 2 weeks. And it was a nightmare. Like, it was amazing for everybody who attended. And by all account, the feedback was, food aplenty, drinks aplenty, the biggest party of their lives, but it was really stressful for us. So you can imagine with a lot of families, it's like your families don't have the same vibe. His family is like very stressy, worry-warty people who will organize stuff 6 months ahead. My parents on the day will be like, it'll be okay. And so you can imagine, especially with Indian families, it's like families marrying families and trying not to offend each other, but really getting offended. And then all of this hype and tension up until the day. And so we were in the middle of that as like the meat sandwich, trying to mitigate both of their expectations. And it was like a couple of days before the wedding, my husband lost a big clump of hair off the top of his head out of stress, because he doesn't do his stress very well. And I remember walking into our reception, and we were holding hands, and like we had to get all these photos done. I had to take control of the whole thing, even though I didn't want to, because he just lost it. Like, he just couldn't do it. And I remember walking and holding his hand, and he was like, this is the worst day of my life, at the reception, at the last event of the thing. And I was like, fuck you. I've done everything up until this point, and you're saying to me this is the worst day of your life? Because, there was still a bunch of things to do. We had to do the thank you speeches. We had to do a speech in itself. We had a dance. Like, there was a big expectation, because we're Indian, that we do this Bollywood dance. And he just goes, I can't do it. I can't do the dance. And so I was like, what are we going to do? Everyone's going to expect it. And he's like, I'm sorry, I can't. So we had to improvise. It was a 9-minute long dance, and I wasn't super fit then, as I'm not now. I had to do the whole thing by myself. He came in the last minute and a half. And I remember our friend Magda Svansky was there. She was at the front, and she was recording the whole thing like this. And I was like, oh my God, couldn't breathe. And I was like, and she was recording it. He comes in the last 1 minute and does a little bit of an Indian dance. Everyone's high-fiving him like he was the hero of the piece. And I was like, I'm sorry. How about my stamina and endurance for actually getting through this thing? So I'm still, as you can tell, I'm still a bit traumatized by the whole thing, even though it was 3 years ago. But if you actually asked me, would we do that again, I probably wouldn't do it that way again. It wasn't worth it.
Wow, that's amazing. And Sharon, how did you end up on Neighbours? How does one get to become a character on Neighbours? What's the process?
But my life has never taken the normal process. So basically, I always wanted to be an actor, and I always wanted to perform from when I was a really young age. Like, I was always that kid that held these impromptu concerts and stuff and invited people over without telling my parents. And before they knew it, there was all these people they had to feed at their house because I just wanted to perform and make people laugh and all of that. And I always wanted to do it, but my parents were kind of like, it's not a viable job for you. There's no one like you on television. You'll have to go to India and work in Bollywood. And that's quite a sketchy industry. It's very casting couch, very corrupt and yucky, and they definitely didn't want me to do that. So they kind of talked me out of as much as I could. So I would just take the classes. And you've got to remember, I was in a rural school where we didn't have very much resources at all. There was no drama schools there. There was no acting teachers. So I just did the class drama in year 11 and 12, loved it. And then I kind of got pushed into getting into law and commerce at university because my parents were like, either you have to be a doctor, dentist, pharmacist, or a lawyer. And I thought lawyer was the closest to acting. And I had made all these plans in my brain. I was like, as soon as we move to Adelaide from this 5,000 strong town, I'll be able to do it then. It was always like that in my life. And so when we moved to Adelaide to go to university, unfortunately, my mum moved with us because she wanted to keep an eye on us and being strict. And so she didn't want us to lose her kids to the clubbing lifestyle and drugs and sex and alcohol. So she was there. So I had to pretend to do soccer classes and other sports things instead of acting. And I did the whole bend it like Beckham. I'd get changed in the bushes outside of my house, take the car, until again I got caught. My mum really should have been a PI. She rocked up to one of my acting classes and she was downstairs with her like arms crossed, and my acting friends still laugh about it today because I wasn't like 12 years old. I was like 20 years old at that age. And so I just continued doing it. I just kept pushing back. So the way I continued that was moving to Melbourne, because I was like, if I move to Melbourne, they can't say shit. I'm financially independent. I was already working as a lawyer, but I never really wanted to do it. I just wanted to do acting. But then, of course, the reality of the situation was that they were right. It's not a viable profession just for the best of actors or like just regular actors. But then there was also that added level of complexity because I'm of diverse background, and the roles were never main roles. They were supportive roles and very typecast roles. Like I played a lawyer in Winners and Losers, like a doctor and whatever. And it would be like one job a year. So it wasn't something that could be a full-time job. And so I got to the point where I kind of gave up on that dream. I was like, it's not going to happen for me here in this country. So I might as well dedicate myself into being a lawyer. And I came up with a compromise. I did entertainment law. So I was like, I'm kind of in, I'm kind of not. Moved to Sydney, and within 18 months got the call brief for Neighbours. Never thought I was going to get it. Came for the audition, came for another audition, and I got it. Like after a couple of months, I got it. And I was so grateful that I finally could do the F you, and go to the acting job. And that's pretty much how I got to where I got to.
What's the audition process like?
It's pretty full on. Like it depends if you're coming in for a guestie or like a day player. It's not as strenuous. Everything's obviously changed at COVID time. Like it's all self-tapes now. But back then, it depends if you're interstate. I had to do a self-tape because I was interstate. And then if you're a main character, they will fly you down and go through audition process. And usually they'll keep you there for the day because they'll figure out if, for me, it was a family that was coming into the show, and they kind of figure out like, I suppose, someone that they really want to be the key person in the family. I'm not necessarily saying that was me, but I do know that they kind of worked around me with the kids and then the husband as well. And then you kind of do chemistry tests with a bunch of different people. For me, like different guys, because we were the husband and wife combo. And I remember, like they're all different types, different ages, different heights, different looks and whatever. And then you have the kids that come through. So they have to kind of look a little bit like you, and then they do all the scenes together. So I think I was flown down twice for that. And then you hear nothing for a while. And then all of a sudden, you get the phone call. And then before you know it, you're on set. It's a very fast moving production. So the turnaround time is very quickly once they say yes.
What was the character you were reading for?
So the character I was reading for was the sister role of my character. Her name was Mishti, and she was a cop, and that was cool. But then they reduced the age of that character. And when I got there, I think it was when I got there after the first one, they said, hey, would she be happy to read for the mother role, which is a bigger role because it was a longer lasting role, but she'd be the mother to 3 kids. And I knew it would be a big job because it was like 3-4 year job. That's what I would potentially be defined as, and to have to play something that was so far removed from who I was, which is what acting is. But I just didn't want to be typecast. And I already felt like I was at this massive deficit because I got my break in my late 20s. And in acting world, that's quite old, that I will never get the opportunity to play like the girl next door or the leading love interest or whatever if I play this mum role. And as soon as I got there, like day one, and I didn't even know, they were like, yeah, so we're cutting all your hair off because you look too similar to your sister, who they cast someone else. She had like long hair. And I just remember just like heartbreaking inside, knowing that's part of the job, but they just literally cut off all my hair. I was wearing these very loose fitted, dowdy clothes, which is, again, not necessarily what a mum looks like, but it was the stereotype of it. And even within the storylines and stuff, the mother generally wasn't a lead storyline. It was always, she supported every single other person. And so I never really felt like I had a storyline or any sort of time to shine. And I know that's a very narcissistic, selfish way of an actor to talk about it, in the sense that, you know, you're in a team, you're in a big group and all of that. But after a couple of years, you kind of go, oh, I would love something to sink my teeth into and to really like feel, instead of always being the person they talk to about it. And those storylines came after I kind of said I wanted to leave. And they're like, well, what if we do this and what if we do that? So I held on to that. And in my last year, I got some pretty meaty stuff. So that was great.
The producers obviously decided that they wanted to introduce an Indian family into Ramsay Street. Was that something that you think was progress or ended up feeling a bit reductive? How did you feel as a woman of colour and a woman of Indian heritage to be part of? Were they just a family like any other, or was their Indian heritage a big part of their characters?
You know, to be honest, within the people of colour circles, we were warned to not go on a show like that because stuff had happened to other people and all of that. But then again, like tying it back into feeling so lucky, you just do it, you do the job. And so I knew there was an Indian family before me. So I was like, we're not the first Indian family, but we were the first interracial marriage, long-term family. I thought that was cool at the start. I was like, yeah, that's great. Like, because that reflects Australian society. We do like mix and we have mixed kids and all of that kind of stuff. So that was great. And so it's a hard one because they would celebrate within the script certain Indian events like Diwali and stuff like that. And at the time I was like, that's awesome. That's cool because that informs the audience of what Diwali is and all that kind of stuff. But then the storylines, sometimes they weren't always reflected in a positive way. And I feel like we're at a time in Australia where if we are going to portray stories, and especially people of colour or other minorities, we do have to be careful about not making them like the bad guy or like, you know, a negative sign. Like they used to always use Arabic people as terrorists or all of that kind of stuff, like to really buck that and almost overcorrect it in a way, because if you look at the audience that we have, those sort of stereotypes can be perpetuated further. And I saw that within what we were doing. So there would be lots of like tokenistic gestures within the scripts. And like I remember talking about curries a lot. And I remember saying, like, wouldn't it be interesting if I hated curry, but my white husband loved curry? Wouldn't that be funny? Like, you know, and always trying to offer up these things in a nice and respectful way. And we had an arranged marriage storyline, which is a thing that happens within Indian communities. And it doesn't happen all the time. Like my sister on the show, that's how she left the show. She got an arranged marriage with a guy and left. And it was kind of a bit more of a negative storyline because she was born in Australia like my character was. Having an arranged marriage if you're born in Australia as an Indian is very rare. Like that just doesn't happen anymore. It's not a normal thing. And I remember reading a lot of commentary on it. And it was just kind of like the butt of a lot of jokes. So, you know, over time, like you have to pick your battles. And unfortunately, the situation is like this. If you bring up something every time, and this is actually what happened to me, if you bring up something like regularly or whatever, you become the problematic one and not easygoing. It doesn't even matter how you say it. I always said everything in a respectful way, but you become difficult. And so then you're like, I have to work in this workplace. Like these are long hours, like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night, every day with these people. And you'd be met with, I suppose, barriers, and it was like too hard to change, or we need to have a meeting with this person, and before you know it, it's fizzled out. So no real change was there. And so, you know, I wasn't included in a lot of stuff. Like there was publicity stuff and things that I couldn't really understand why I wasn't included, but everybody else was, or even people from my family, and not really given the same invitations and publicity things. And I would ask, I'd question, I'd say, how come it's like this? And not really given proper answers as to that. And I remember when we first came, one of the publicists asked me and said, how should we introduce your family? And I said, well, I don't know, you're a publicist. Like, what do you think? And she's like, oh, because back like when we did the other Indian family, there was so much backlash and stuff. So I don't know if we should make a big deal about it. And I was just like, why do we have to say it's an Indian family or some people with Indian people? Why can't we just say it's a new family? And inevitably we did that. But I definitely believe that there was much less hoo-ha or like publicity for when we came because they were trying to counteract potential backlash that could have come. Whereas I feel like you could have taken leadership in that moment and just done it and then not worried about the rest of it. Or if you do worry about it, moderate it. And that was another issue, like social media and stuff wasn't moderated. And then as soon as we came on, of course, there was a lot of racism and a lot of like they're going to blow up the street and all that kind of stuff. And it is really difficult to read that. I had a younger daughter on the show who was 13 when she started in real life. And she would be reading that stuff and she hadn't even really been exposed to racism. And it's weird because within our communities, even if we're not, once you're put onto this platform and this big thing and nobody's there to kind of protect you from that, it can really crush you and you end up being a bit bitter about, I suppose, the society that you live in.
It's really interesting, that conversation, isn't it? Because I've always wondered how much input an actor has into what their character does. And I guess that speaks to who's got power on the show because, as you say, it's an ensemble cast. There's lots of different characters on Neighbours or on any, ensemble cast show, whether it's Grey's Anatomy or whatever it happens to be. But is there an unspoken power ranking or how does it work?
Absolutely. And there's hierarchy obviously within the workplace because I never knew how it worked. But then the guys that are making big decisions up top are usually old white dudes, unfortunately, and they have a perception of what they want in the show. It filters down, and whether there is people that are like, aware and woke and know about these things, they might try to push back at different levels, but ultimately the decision makers are the decision makers and their hands are tied. So it's all different levels of frustration. And then when you're on set, like, it's such a fast-paced moving show, and if you're new, you obviously don't have any power, and so you kind of just have to be easygoing. That's the kind of actor they like, is the easygoing actor that does everything and all of that. And then, you have your ADs and then you have your producers, and there's obviously hierarchy within the producers. And it's not something that you can navigate and make it work to your advantage. Like it never is. It's like you've got to hedge your bets and kind of go, if I have this conversation, what's the ramification going to be for me? Will it mean that I miss out on this? Would it mean that I'll get less storyline? Would it mean that they'll write me out? Will I get blacklisted? Like there are all conversations and things that I had to have like throughout that whole time of navigating it. And what happens when you work on a show like that, and then I'm sure like on Grey's Anatomy and all these other big ones that are all encompassing, that are big longer term contracts, is that that's your life, like that's your bubble, and you usually become a bit isolated from your real life, like your friends and stuff like that, by virtue of being exhausted all the time, learning your lines on the weekend, not having time to interact. And so that's all you think it is. You think that's be all end all, and everything becomes hypersensitized. And someone will look at you a different way, or like we whispering about you because you said something, or they won't stand with you when you're raising an issue. And it all becomes like a really toxic, weird work environment where we have a list of things that we aspire to be, like mission statements and like, that stuff. But in the reality of the situation is that's never really practiced. It's just like a document
High
that's
school.
put on the Yeah, literally. It's like literally, if that was the way I compare that place, it was high school. And luckily I came in at a later age in my life, so I had seen a lot. I've been through quite a bit, and I'd come in and go, wow, this shit is whack. This is not normal. It's not normal, like the way people are treating each other, what's happening, like where am I? But then still needing to keep that job. Like a lot of people in different workplaces, like it affects your whole life, like your married life, your everything, and you have to figure out how you're going to survive the thing and how far you're going to go with it and when you're going to extricate yourself out of it and all of that. So
taking yourself back to the beginning of the first lockdown last year, were you thinking about leaving already at the time? Where was your head at?
my ultimate dream would be to be working consistently anywhere, wherever anybody would hire me. And I would love it to be Australia because that's where I am and my family is, and I love it here. But the reality is I would get more work in the US or the UK by the way I look. But in order to be able to work in that workplace, you need to have a strong body of work in the country that you're from, which is really difficult to get. But so that's why when you get a job like Neighbours, a lot of people use it as a springboard to the next thing. But to even use it for that springboard, my agent would say you need 500 eps under your belt. So I had committed myself to that for the other side, the bigger picture, to do the 3 years. Then after that, I did try to negotiate my way out because I wasn't having a good time there, and the producers were aware of it. And I wanted to look after my mental health. And also, I wasn't getting storylines, and I did the pros and cons and all that kind of stuff. And so I said that I had wanted to leave for different reasons. And then they floated the idea of having an affair storyline, which is a meaty in soap world. It's a meaty storyline where our family would break up and I'd have an affair with the actor who is Tim Robards, but the actor Pierce Grayson. And that interested me a little bit, but I had said, okay, well, all right, I'll stay for 6 months. I think it was 6 months or something like that. Obviously, then COVID hit and then it got extended out to the end of the year, which I was really grateful for because otherwise I'd just completely be out of a job. And so, yeah, that's when I got that storyline, but I knew that I was going to be leaving at the end of the year. I was hoping that COVID would have cleared itself up by then, but it didn't, as you know. And I finished in December 2020.
So you said before that it would be easier for you to get work in the UK and the US rather than in Australia. Is that because of the colour of your skin?
100%, yeah. I think that we've made a lot of progress in this country. In my time, like I've been part of so many different committees and roundtables about diversity, and I think there are some really wonderful people in the industry, casting directors and agents and producers and directors, but collectively we're really behind. We've got a really long way to go. These conversations are had everywhere, like for instance with The Bachelorette and Brooke, I'm sure these conversations were had about, but will it rate? And what it requires is like those big key decision makers and people in power to take risks. I think I read something that someone from Viacom had talked about Brooke and saying it was the right time, you know, with her background and her diversity, and we just need to deal with it and whatever happens afterwards. Like I wish that approach was taken by so many people, but I think at the end of the day, money talks, and a lot of people, you'll notice it's a lot of familiar faces in Australian television. They tend to use the same people all the time, which is really difficult to break in. And I suppose the business decision behind that would be familiarity, eyes on screen. Like they know this actor, and they like them, but that makes it really hard for anybody else to kind of break through and get here. Whereas I think the amount of work in the UK and the US is so much greater. Like our industry is amazing here in Australia, but really it's very small, like compared to everywhere else. So if you want to give yourself more opportunity, you probably have to be in a place where you can audition more regularly. Like you're not doing one audition a week, you're doing a couple a day. But yeah, the diversity here is quite hard to navigate. I still get like a lot of the briefs I get is just like Indian 25, 35, Indian 25. You're defined literally by your heritage. And that sucks a bit because honestly, like up until I got into this role and to the acting world, yeah, of course when I was working as a litigation lawyer, I dealt with like the old white guys in power and just men in general and the sexism and stuff. But race wasn't really a thing in that industry. It was more sexism, less women in those positions. Then I came into the acting stuff and it's literally defined by the way you look. I forget that I'm Indian 99.999% of the time. I'm just me. It's a part of my identity, but it's just forced upon you. And, you know, it just sucks because like I've lost jobs, and recently I've lost jobs where a director would say, she doesn't look Indian enough, no. And it's like, both my parents are Indian. I can't win either way. Like, I don't look Indian enough. Also, what is your perception of what an Indian looks like? That's saying a lot about you and not about me. Like, do you think they look darker or have different features? You know, so there's like a whole perception of like that I think is not congruent with reality in this country of who people are and how diverse we are and how multicultural and cosmopolitan and great people are, because they can't get out of these boxes of like what we are, and we have to put people in this box. This is a gay person, this is a black person, this is an Indian person, and they can't all mix and be intersectional and stuff like that. And that's where I think it's going to take so long. There are amazing female directors and queer directors and stuff like that, but until we really get in those positions of power, then it's going to filter down. And I just feel like I don't have that time to waste. Like I'm like, it's going to take 20 years, you know, whereas in other countries they've progressed a bit quicker.
I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter with Sharon Johal. The beginning of lockdown was difficult for everybody. There was a lot of uncertainty around, but you had a secret that nobody on set knew. You were still filming. Tell me about that Friday
Yeah, so I was obviously having a bit of a shit time working on that show, and I was trying to get through and survive and leave. This is 2020. This is during COVID time too. So production had shut down for a couple of weeks, but we'd figured out a COVID safe plan to continue operating. And I was just trying to get to that finish line. So my husband and I, obviously been married for a few years, been together for many more. We talked about having kids, but given that I was going through that headspace at work, we had made a decision with each other that we weren't going to try whilst I was working on the show. Just didn't want that negative energy to come through. But my boobs started hurting. I was really tired all the time. I just wanted to sleep and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I just thought it was like COVID lag and like, fatigue. And then he's like, you should get a pregnancy test. I'm like, no, there's no way. And, in COVID time, we weren't the couple that were like sexing like rabbits. We were like, it's depressing, right? So we weren't like, it's like, we weren't having sex often enough for me to be like, I'm pregnant. Anyway, I took the test and I was pregnant.
Only takes once, Sharon.
Yeah, I know, right? And I also do, like we've all been on like contraception for many years. I was like, as if I'm the person who get touched and I'm pregnant. No, it would take ages for me to actually get pregnant. Anyway, turns out I was.
Were you using contraception?
No, we weren't. We were using the pull-out method,
Ah.
which has worked for us. But we also had the mindset of like, if we get pregnant.
Until it didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a couple of kids that way.
Yeah, right. So, but we were also like, if we get pregnant, that's great. Then we'll have the baby. And it's, like we were in a safe space. So, but then when I got pregnant, I shit myself and I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? Because in my brain, I was like, once I finish Neighbours, I'll try my luck overseas and I'll do that because I'm in my 30s. Like I've got to do that quickly. And then I was like, well, that's not going to happen. I'm just going to end up being a mum and that's going to be the rest of my life. Oh no. Like, so I had a few like reservations, like we were never going to do anything about it. But I did feel a bit like, oh no, all right, whatever. And then I got excited about it and we both did. And we were like, awesome. By the time I finish my job here, I'll be 6 months pregnant and I'll have time off and we can nurture it and it will be amazing and like so happy. And we called my family and FaceTimed them. They were really happy. And then on that Friday, like I was 16 weeks, about 16 weeks, 15, 16 weeks, but I was quite further along. And like I had this beautiful female director, Tanika, I love her. And I just told her, she was the only person I told at work that I was pregnant because she was finishing up as well and going into another job. And we always have these chats, same age group and so happy for each other. And she was like, oh my God, that's amazing. All good. And then like, when you get your period and you get those weird cramps, I hadn't had that for months because obviously I was pregnant and I was like, oh, that's weird. That's really painful. What the fuck's going on? And having not been pregnant before, I had no idea what that would be like. So I went into the back of Harold's Cafe, which was Dipi's cafe, my characters. And I just like looked in my undies and I was like, what's going on? And then I saw a little bit of blood and I was like, fuck, okay, what could that be? All right. Cool. We've just got one scene to go. I'll just get through the scene and go because that's kind of the vibe of that workplace. You do your work, you can't leave even if you're sick. So I just did it and it was a Friday and I was driving home and like to add another complexity to the situation, my best friend, like since I was young, she had gone through like so many rounds of IVF. I think it was a 4th round or whatever. And she was trying to get pregnant at the time. And it's that weird thing of like, I didn't even try and I got pregnant and she's going through all these rounds and you feel guilt both ways. Anyway, she was one that knew about it all when I called her and she said, no, my mum had her period like basically the whole time I was born. It's normal. It's like implantation, something or whatever.
Yeah,
like when
sometimes you can get spotting when, yeah, but you were way past that, right?
Way past that, but I didn't know. And so then I go home and I spoke to my husband and he's like, oh, it's weird. We'll just monitor it. And then as the night went on, it just kept getting more painful and a bit more blood. And we were Googling it, of course. And I didn't want to go to hospital because it's smack bang COVID time. You have to go and by yourself. Like it's a lonely experience. Anyway, we called the doctor and my doctor wasn't available. So they put me on to someone else. And straight away, that guy was like, you're having a miscarriage, but what we're worried about is like your blood becoming toxic for the next baby. So you need to have this injection and that. Yeah, like straight up. And I was like, no, but how do you know it's a miscarriage? And
he wouldn't have been able to tell. That's awful.
And I don't know if it was maybe in his experience, he had a patient who, because there is that risk of toxicity and then it means that for the next pregnancy it can be difficult. But just the way he handled it, I was just like in shock. And I was like, no, it can't be. And I'm like, he's wrong. He doesn't know. He hasn't tested it anyway. Hubby took me to the hospital. He just packed my bag and made us go. They checked me all out. We saw the baby and the doctor said, No, I think it's all right. I think you're okay. You're not dilated or anything. I think you're fine. Go home, and as soon as we got home, water come out, like your water breaks, which I didn't know that that happens like for such an early pregnancy. It was just like a gush of stuff, and I didn't know what it was. I thought I weed myself, and so I went to the bathroom, and it was just like hectic pain everywhere, whole back of my body, the front. I was screaming in pain, and poor husband and puppy were just sitting there looking at me going, what's going on? He was Googling, and he knew that I was having a miscarriage, but he didn't want to tell me. And then it became a thing of like whatever was passing, we were looking at it and inspecting it. And it's like, is it that? Could it be that? And this sounds really gross, but I feel completely comfortable sharing. But I was keeping those things and putting them in containers just in case
Of course.
that could have been the baby. Anyway, passed out from the pain.
Oh, babe.
It was still bleeding, and I called. I was just on the floorboards, just passed out, and we called the doctor, and she said, I think that's what's happened. You can come in, but there's nothing you could do, and she's obviously going to be in here on her own. And so I went into the bath, and it was just blood everywhere, and then went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I just thought it was a dream. I was like, please let it be a dream. Please let it be a dream. And obviously it wasn't. And then I had to make the call because our families live in Adelaide. We had to do the FaceTime calls over the phone. And that was just devastating. Like my dad, you can imagine, he's like the patriarch in the family, was just bawling his eyes out. And my mum, same. And like my mother-in-law. And it was just shit. And it was just really lonely because it's not something that you want to just chat on the phone about for ages. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing anyone can do. That sort of pain just requires like your family and your best friends to just kind of be sitting with you and going through it and just like being sad together. And we kind of missed out on that. And then after that, all you see is people with kids and babies everywhere. And then you're just like, why couldn't it happen for me? Why doesn't anything ever work out for me? And you go through those real negative spirals of, I must have done something really bad in my life or karma to deserve this. So that was really hard. And I didn't tell anyone for months because there's not much people can do, because it's great news. You start that conversation, go, because everyone knows that's kind of like the time in your life. You get that question. I get it all the time. It's like, are you guys having a baby? Are you trying for a baby? You're in your 30s in a happily married couple. And to be like, yeah, I was, but now I'm not. And they're like, yay, oh no, that's really sad. But I realized through that was kind of the worst thing I could have done, is by not talking about it. I should have really kept talking about it, because what happens is you switch off from everybody. I went off the radar. I basically went missing like for 6 months, didn't talk to anyone. And I was lucky in a way because it was COVID time. So people could have thought I was just messed up from COVID. But other people who just don't have that insight would have just thought I was being a bitch, and I'm just not knowing what had happened. And so then you have to repair those relationships that you've kind of fractured. But you shouldn't have to do that as well, because like you're already gone through enough. So I shared that story with you guys because I thought it was really important to talk about what happens and what that means like for you and your partner. And you get angry at your partner for no reason that had nothing to do with it, and then you're both sad and he's grieving as well. We'd really come to the position where we'd already imagined and envisaged a lot of stuff. And as a result of that trauma, so that was in 2020, this year, like I got checked out and he got checked out too, actually, and we just took to make sure there was no abnormalities and stuff. And they're like, you're perfectly safe and healthy, and actually if you do try now, you're more than likely to get pregnant. But honestly, Mia, like we don't feel ready. Now we don't feel ready.
Emotionally.
We're just emotionally, we're just like, we don't want to go through that again. And so we're investigating different things like egg freezing and stuff like that, so that we don't jeopardize the eggs that I do have until, I don't know when I'm going to be ready, when we're going to be ready.
Oh, honey, I'm so sorry that you've been through that. I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I read your piece on Mamamia, and I was so moved by it. And there were things in there that I heard described that even as someone who's been through it myself hadn't heard described before, like the brutality of miscarrying in a bathroom. That is something that nobody really speaks about, and what it looks like and what you have to see and the trauma that comes from that, and then feeling, was this my fault? Did I kill the baby by not wanting it enough? Did I kill the baby by having those doubts in the beginning, or by being too stressed or by working too hard or by, a million things.
Having that coffee,
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the working too hard because I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't back down from work. It was like the primary storyline at the time. And I was dealing with a lot of stuff like at work as well. It was like probably the shittest year of my life, to be honest. Like, and it's still ongoing.
yeah.
Like you can look back at difficult times in our life and go, yeah, it made me resilient and all of that. But that's because we're like really searching for some sort of silver lining and something to make it better. Yeah, but it's a hole you feel like
You
can't
won't
get out of.
understand 2020 until you're holding your future baby in your arms, and then you'll be able to learn a lesson from it and say, yeah, I get why that happened. But you can't rush yourself to that understanding, I don't think.
Yeah.
You just can't. What did you not know about miscarriage? I mean, apart from everything.
Yeah.
But many people think that it sort of ends with bleeding and what happened to you in the bathroom. But what happened after that?
A bunch of things. So what I didn't know was, I feel so stupid, but I know I'm not the only one, is that first of all, it's so common. And because we don't talk about it, we don't know it's that common. I'd also had a misapprehension that because I'm a relatively healthy person, I don't really drink that much, don't smoke, all of that. And I have not had any medical difficulties in anything up until now. So I was like, I'm healthy. Why did that happen? I had a misapprehension that you would have some predisposition to, I don't know, endo, other things or whatever. So that there was that. But also, I think the time it takes for your body to regulate afterwards is a thing. So like my boobs got so big, like they're already big anyway, naturally, and they got to like a size E, F, G. They were huge. And at the time, it's what I hate about like, how we're so defined by how we look and stuff. My boobs were really big, but because I hadn't told costume department at work, they were kind of falling out of my clothes a little bit. And I was copying so much trolling for being fat and overweight. And my tits are always out. She's always hanging her tits out, like not knowing that I was really pregnant at the time. But I got these huge stretch marks as a result. My boobs are not the same. Like it's like they've become a bit saggier and they've got these stretch marks, but I don't have a baby to show for it, which sucks.
Did your milk come in?
No, that hadn't happened yet. No, it hadn't happened yet, but the boob stayed sore for ages afterwards as well. So that was weird. And then the period.
Because your body still thinks it's pregnant, right?
Yeah, 100%. And again, looking at silver linings, like going back in, they were like, this is great. You've had an efficient miscarriage, which means they don't have to go in and scrape stuff out and all of that, have a curette. So there was that, but to get your period to adjust properly after that, it takes some time. And also since then, my periods have been so painful. It's changed my body and I don't know why. We're investigating that at the moment. So that changed. And then I grew these weird lumps in my boobs, which I'd never had before. And then I was like, well, fuck, now I've got breast cancer. So then I had to go to the breast clinic and stuff and had all of these appointments to figure out what was going on. And I think because of the sudden hormone drop, this is what the doctor was saying, that these cysts and stuff had formed as a result of that. So, yeah, so they were kind of the things. But I think mentally, like the thing I didn't know was like how much it would take away even at such a early stage, I suppose. I mean, it's not necessarily
But that wasn't early. I mean, if you were 15 or 16 weeks, that's not early because also mentally they all say once you get to 12 weeks, don't say anything until 12
That's
weeks.
the
But after
thing.
12 weeks, the chance of miscarriage is much lower. So you go, phew.
100% what it is. And that's
Yeah.
that's why I was just so gutted. But, like you don't want to compare trauma with people and all that. But we actually have friends in Adelaide who have lost their baby right at the end and at 8 months and in this day and age, which is crazy to me, like given scientific advancement and everything, that these things still happen.
Can I ask you a personal question? And you don't have to answer it, but the remains of your baby, what did you do with them?
That no one's asked me that question before. And I'm just going to tell the truth. So basically that day, so fucked up, but that day or the whatever, we had gotten McDonald's, like we just gone some junk food or whatever. It's just weird because now I really struggle to eat McDonald's, but we had some Tupperware and whatever, but we had I think it's the lids for like a McFlurry. I had that at home and we put it in that. And also just to explain, like, it doesn't look like a baby when it comes out at all. It's tissue. It's all bits of tissue. So you're kind of like, this could be like my lining, maybe it's period stuff, whatever. But there was one hard kind of bit that was kind of like a big bean, I suppose. We put it in there and put a cover, put Glad wrap over it, because also I thought maybe I'd have to take it to the hospital and stuff like that. Left it in there. And this is so gross, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of that for ages. So my husband wanted to get rid of it. He's just like, we've got this in the fridge. And what are we going to do with it? And I was like, I don't want to throw it away. I'm like, should we bury it? Like, what should we do with it? And we just kind of put it to the side, and I didn't want to deal with it. And then it became like, not a joke, but like after some time, we'd just be like, oh, the baby's in the fridge. And it's so weird how you deal with stuff.
Dark humour, yeah.
It's dark humour. And it's like, I don't feel like I want to put this in a rubbish bin. Like, I don't want to put it in a rubbish bin that goes on the street. Like, I just can't do it. So we did take it out of the thing and buried it in our backyard, praying to God our dog wouldn't dig it up and eat the baby. Like, I know that sounds really weird and whatever, but you just try to find like
it's beautiful.
humour anywhere.
You have to. So you finished 2020, you left Neighbours. It was your annus horribilis, an absolute shit show.
Absolutely.
How's 2021 been for you?
2021 is interesting because I obviously finished up on the show, but since then I'd already booked in to come back as a guestie. So I had a long-term relationship with someone on the show, as in like a working relationship with someone on the show that had made my life hell while I was there. And the producers were aware of it and stuff. And some of the storylines and stuff they'd made was, I suppose, a mechanism to protect me from that without really doing anything about it. But I was happy to be gone, and that was a big part of it. But they asked me to come back in 2021 because they said that person's not going to be there anymore. So you will have a really great positive experience of the show. Like, it's hard because you can't see people in black and white. Like a person's not fully bad or bad person or fully good person. This producer was trying to help me in a way, but then they didn't help me in other ways. But in this regard, in this action, they were like, come back and then you'll have a great experience. So I'd already signed on to come back in April as a guestie of my same character. In between that time, from the end of December until that time, we had two amazing Aboriginal actors who had spoken up against racism on the show and their experiences while they were there. Sharina Clayton and also Main White. And being a person of colour and the experiences that I'd gone through on the show, I just know there is a system in place which would allow those things to happen. So I didn't doubt what they had said. But unfortunately, when they spoke up, the media just like annihilated them and just questioned their honesty and their motivations behind speaking up. And that was heartbreaking to me, particularly coming off of Black Lives Matter in 2020. It just flabbergasted me that what one particular person said wasn't believed. And I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. Like, when that happened, I was like, fuck, I've left the show and I think survived it, I suppose. But what's my moral obligation and responsibility here? Do I stand up for these people, stand with them, support them at a very real detriment and cost to my career of being blacklisted and, you know, losing further jobs and all of that sort of stuff? Or do I just shut my mouth and just keep doing what I'm doing? And inevitably, I just couldn't do the latter, and I had to say something. And then it became an issue of how best do I manage a shit situation. All the media was contacting me because I was like the longest surfing person of colour on the show. So they were like, what was your experience there? And keeping in mind that this is a huge production with heaps of people who are not all shit, you know, like there's a lot of great people there that, again, constrained by the higher levels and systems that allow shitty shit to happen. I didn't want them to lose jobs. I didn't want the show to shut down. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to support these guys, and I wanted a positive change to happen. So do I speak to the media? Do I not? And I had to engage my own help, like a publicist and a defamation lawyer, and say, how do I do this without fucking myself up and also fucking over the wrong people, I suppose, people that I didn't want to. And they suggested that I write, because I'm also a lawyer, so they suggest write it yourself, and obviously the stuff that you say is your stuff, and go from there. So I wrote, and it was so many drafts of this, like I wrote this 10,000 word thing of like, you know, just trying to like not massage it. But unfortunately, when you speak up in a country like Australia, you have to make it palatable to the audience. You can't just say what you want to say. The way I speak in my circles of people of colour versus the way I speak in media or the way I speak to a predominantly white room is different, unfortunately. And I hate that. Like, I feel like that's quite fake.
Different in what way?
It's like I can't just be honest and say like the whole system's fucked, because there is such a great level of white fragility in this country. Like, people do not want to think that they're racist in any way whatsoever. They don't even want to hear it. They will get defensive straight away. They'll get their back up. I've experienced it personally. I've seen it everywhere. Like, you see it in sport, you see it everywhere. No, we're not racist. Like, I've got friends and I'm all about Black Lives Matter. But put in a situation, do you really understand your white privilege and how you've been given opportunities that other people haven't? Have you made space for other people? Have you even considered what it might be like? Like, I'm very well aware that even speaking about this now and on other things I've spoken about, that I'm probably defined as like the person who spoke against racism and all she cares about is diversity and people of color. And, oh, here we go again. Like, I've heard that, I've read that, the eye rolls of people. And I never wanted to be that person. Like, I didn't go, I want to be an activist for inclusivity and against racism. I never thought that that was my thing. But some situation and things happened in my presence and around me that have required me to stand up at the right time and say the thing. And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of people after that, they just want me to talk about that all the time, and it takes a fucking toll. I'm exhausted, like, from this process. You know, so I spoke up and I wrote my statement and I said what happened to me specifically, and all of it was backed up.
You wrote that. What was it for? Where did you distribute that?
So I put it on my own website because I did not want to give it to media and for them to misconstrue it in a different way, because everyone's got their own intentions and motivations. I wanted people to read it in its entirety. So I talked about my experience on the show, what I'd hoped the workplace would be, and I actually set out a roadmap of how we could get there and what I think is required given the pace of the show, the cultural education, all this kind of stuff, and a hopeful, you know, gesture that, you know, we can change and make this better for other people. And also a lot of it, there were people in really high positions of power at the corporation who said, like, we've been on set, we've talked to a lot of people of, it's true, like, we know, and can you help us and going forward? And so I was like, what does that look like? And they're like, we want to conduct an investigation into this, a legal investigation in addition to a cultural one. Would you be involved? And it kind of timed up around the time that I went back to set. So I'd already put my statement out. It was like the week before, a couple of days before, and then I was required to go onto set. Yeah, so you can imagine.
What was that day like?
Fucked. So I didn't sleep that weekend. I was trying to pull out because I knew at that point there was Daily Mail, like, was parked outside the workplace in Nunawading taking photos of people. And I'd taken a stand. I'd taken a public stand against racism, and I had basically snitched and dobbed on this workplace that I was about to go back to. And then I had to weigh up. I was like, if I pull out, will they come at me for a breach of contract? Because it is in their interest for me to be seen at that workplace, because you don't trust anyone. Like, in this process, you go, well, then they can easily rebuff what I've said by saying, oh, but she came to set, so obviously it wasn't unsafe for her to be there, even though I felt like it was unsafe. So I had meetings with, you know, the CEO and all of this, and I just was like, I don't feel protected and I don't feel safe. And that person was like, I'll be there with you every step of the way. And then I'm like, what's your motivation? Like, you're acting for the company, you're not acting for me. I'm just like this little ant in all of this. I don't want to be used against. And, you know, there was a lot of conversations from various people trying to pit me against the other people of color and saying that wasn't what they're saying, it's not true, but what you're saying is true. And it was just all this inappropriate stuff at all different levels. And anyway, the night before, I remember it was like 9:30 and I spoke to CEO and I was just like, I'm not coming in, I can't do it, I'm sorry, mentally I can't. And they were like, I'll be there, just come please. And then there was a part of me that was like, they shouldn't be able to take that away from me. They shouldn't be able to mess up my experience now, and I should be able to go to work. So people around me told me, just go. And I was there at 5:30 in the morning. My husband was there, like the CEO was there. I had a union representative, and it was really hard because I came into a workplace.
Oh my God, just a quiet little low-key day. No one will notice.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
Yeah.
The CEO, my husband, someone from the union.
Yeah.
God.
The hardest thing I think was to navigate was I obviously had lots of friends from this workplace. Well, I thought friends. And when that happened, they just went missing, dispersed, like people that had come to my wedding in Adelaide. were just nowhere to be found, not reached out
Because
to
you were
be like, "Are you
radioactive.
okay?" Yeah, and some of the instances of racism, they were there, they saw it, they said it was fucked, like they knew, and they were nowhere to be found. Nobody contacted me to be like, "It's fine, I'll be there, I'll have your back." Like, and I found that really, really hard to reconcile with, because it's like, this is bigger than you guys. And I'm trying to do something for a big reason. I've also tried to protect you guys, because before I'd written my statement, everyone had just was assuming everyone there was fucked and everybody was racist. I made it very clear in my statement, and I said, it's only a few people in my experience. It's not everyone. So I was actually trying to protect the people that I worked with, yet they weren't anywhere there to protect me. And some of these people were also minorities, Mia. So like, these are people that I stood up for in so many different ways, on set, around set, in the scripts, outside of work and whatever, just didn't want anything to do with me. That killed me, because I was like, I thought minorities support minorities. Like, and my so-called best friend was worried about her own job. She was saying things like, I've worked so hard for this job and I don't want to lose it. And the show's probably going to be cancelled now because of what's been said. Like, white privilege at its finest. And so how do I deal with these people going forward if they can't even support me in this worst thing where they know it's wrong and they do all this performative stuff about being pro Black Lives Matter? But when the opportunity came, even if you didn't want to support me publicly, but just send me a text or just check in, you didn't take it, I couldn't be friends with those people. So I had to cull a lot of people after that. And at that workplace that week was like the most uncomfortable thing ever. They put me in for my own protection, I suppose, but they put me in a separate room where I didn't have any contact with anybody. I just had to go on set without rehearsal, because we weren't having rehearsal because of COVID and stuff, and just say the lines, be hyper emotional, be happy, do whatever I had to do, and just leave. And I was really proud of myself, because I got to the very last day, but on the last day, there were certain people that were around that just tried to make me feel uncomfortable, and it worked. I did my scene, but I went into the room and I just had a full-on panic attack breakdown. And I think there was one scene left to be filmed, and I was just like, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. And I just walked out of there hoping that experience would have been good, and I would have walked out going, yep, I survived it, but was just crying on the curbside with the CEO and just saying, I can't go further with this. And in that moment, he asked me to participate in the investigation, the legal one. And I said, I can't do it. It's too traumatizing. Like, even being back here is traumatizing. I don't want to go through that again. Anyway, long story short, I left, and they kept asking me to be involved. And I thought, I don't know if I regret the decision. I think I probably do. But if I don't participate in this now, then all of this would have been for nothing, and no real change can happen, because I've got like the strongest, I suppose, story to tell in this, and nothing will happen. That started in April. Investigation's still ongoing. And we all know, with bureaucracy and red tape, and, like, as a lawyer myself, I have to question whether that's a strategic thing, that it's taking so long. The momentum around it's fizzled out. A lot of people, out of fear, are not coming forward. A lot of people probably are not going to confirm stuff. The outcome might be toothless. Like, there may be no real result of this thing. And I have to make peace with that, even though I've invested so much of myself, my time, my energy during COVID. Like, it's been shit. So 2021 has been crap in that regard. But I will say, I do feel like I'm coming out of that darkness, in that I've obviously learned a lot. I've had a lot of time for solitude. I've learned a lot about people. I've learned a lot about myself. And, there was times where I was auditioning for stuff for that particular network and stuff, and I was getting to the end, but not getting it. And I was like blacklisted. My name's probably fucking written on a board somewhere. It's like, we don't want her. She's radioactive. She might call us out. She might whatever. Didn't get those jobs, but got some other great ones. So I'm really grateful for that, and just looking on the up now, coming out of lockdown.
Thank you for your honesty about everything that's happened to you. I think that a lot of people will be listening to all different parts of your story and thinking, me too, me too. So thank you. I know that speaking about these things always takes a toll on the person who speaks, but it's a generous act.
Thank you so much, Mia. And again, like, I really appreciate you holding the space for me and people like me to tell these stories, because I too am very inspired by the people you chat to. And I think more than ever, that honesty and realness is really serving us in talking about how we feel coming out of this, how our womanhood experiences feel, and then this whole thing of being included and wanting to fit in and all of that sort of stuff as well. So I really thank you, and I've really appreciated the chat today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this No Filter. That interview, like my favourite No Filter interviews, went in all kinds of different and unexpected directions. I just found Sharon so lovely to talk to, and she's written the most beautiful piece about miscarriage on Mamamia, and she worked very closely with our lifestyle editor Tamara Davies, who hosts another one of our podcasts called What Are You Wearing? But anyway, that's a tangent. The thing about that story, as someone who has been through what Sharon's been through, I reached out to her. I slid into her DMs after I read that on Mamamia, and I just said, hey, you articulated things that I haven't even been able to articulate, and I just wanted to thank you, because I think that whenever a woman does that, she gives a gift to other women who've been through it and other women who will go through it in the future. And that's why I wanted to have her on the show. You can find a link to Sharon's Instagram in the show notes, and we'll also put a link to that incredible story that she wrote for Mamamia. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville, and the executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and if you want more of us in your life, come and visit the Mamamia app. And just by reading or listening to our content, just by listening to this podcast today, you are helping to fund girls in schools in some of the most disadvantaged countries in the world. Through our partnership with Room to Read, we're currently sending 300 girls to school every single day, and our aim is to get to 1,000 and then 10,000. Because at Mamamia, our core purpose is to make the world a better place for women and girls.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.